Welcome to WhatTheActualDev, the no bullshit development podcast.
No fluff, no marketing, just honest conversations, practical insights, and expert advice from developers who've been in the trenches.
My name is Aaron.
And I'm Brian.
Let's dive deep into the human aspects of the software industry
and support each other on this journey.
All right. So I actually decided to start this podcast on the premise of, just a no bullshit, no nonsense platform for, Brian and I to talk about the everyday bullshit that we deal with in the engineering field. I've started getting sucked into Gary Vee over the last couple of months, listening to, just kind of his inspirational stuff and looking for development podcasts that actually talk about, the shit we deal with on a daily basis. And just didn't really find a whole lot. So, it's kind of like I started working on it. Reached out to Brian, who's a good friend of mine and somebody I've worked with in the past. And, just kind of kicked around this idea. And my thought was, if we can help at least one engineer understand they're not alone in the, the shit that they deal with, the struggle of every day, and give them at least insight into how we've handled all the bullshit that we've come across. Maybe that's worth it. So yeah, that's why I jumped in. We'll let Brian kind of give you an idea of what he wanted.
No, it's great to be here. This is definitely something new medium for me for dealing with podcasts and delivering this. But I always love a new adventure. I always have grown my career through the community and upskilling through other people's vlogs and tutorials and blogs, and honestly, I kind of had a desire to give back to the community. I've been doing that for various ways throughout my career. And a podcast is just another medium I thought would be not only a lot of fun together, but also an easy way to go to a wide audience and the least amount of work in a way. But I've always enjoyed in my career too as a developer listening about the world while I'm on hikes through podcasts, while I'm going running or while I'm working out or just need to kind of get away from it all. I'm always listening to some sort of technical podcast. And I've always enjoyed kind of the soft side of the technical of our industry. A lot of times it's demonstrations of code and you have to kind of watch it. You have to see where people are clicking in their IDEs. They're talking about how they're moving code to various deployment settings. But my favorite technical podcast has always been talking about theories, always been talking about how people work, how the job works. And so coming up about what the actual dev, that would be great. And I realized too that I've been in the field long enough that I assume I have some expertise for my pain-driven development that I could share with others. And if I can prevent them from having to bleed the way I bled, then, the next generation is going to be better than the previous. So it's great to be here. Aaron, thanks for having me here. It's good to be part of this.
I think that's actually how we kind of like kicked off our friendship anyways. Like, we both started with the same company around the same time and really just kind of resonated with the things that we had dealt with and how they should have been handled. But weren't even really being handled then where we were at. So, I mean, we kind of...
Yeah. Well, and not only just at the similar time, I mean, it was at like the peak of COVID, right? We were both remote employees for a new company. So there's new people, there's new vulnerabilities there from us being pretty established in our career. And I always thought it was kind of interesting because with our friendship going over the last handful of years, really we've only seen each other in person maybe a total of 8 days. And that was consistent of 2 trips to, 2 business trips to that area.
Yep.
So I think it's interesting. You kind of find your herd, right? You find people you connect with. You find people that have similar experiences, and you get a little bit of confirmation bias of that group. But at the same time, there's other experience, even though like you and I have talked about the past experiencing some of the same, bullet point type experiences. What we grew through it, how we grew through it, what we took from it is different. And it's always interesting to see other people's perspectives too. I always laugh because as I went through my career and got into leadership, I remember a lot of the trainings for our leadership from HR was really much, it's not what you say, it's how people hear it. And it's all about the perception of your leadership. And that's really stuck with me over the years, and it's really kind of set up my guidelines of, making sure I don't cross certain lines and thresholds and realizing, it's not how I say it's how people are listening. It's very important to those that I lead to understand if they're listening to what I've said, and they, most importantly, understand it. You don't want to have that assumption of knowledge, which I think could be a gap and lead to later in your sprint being way out in left field, and you're like, where is this person going? It's not what we talked about, but it's just because they heard it differently than how I said it. So it's important to have that multiple perspectives of those in attendance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a part of that is like, I mean, there's that part of leadership where it is making sure that they understand where you're coming from, that they understand the process and what is needed, but also the idea that you're there to also listen and help them understand something if they're not understanding it.
Mhm.
Because a lot of what, at least from what I've learned, is that a lot of leadership is actually listening. It's not actually telling.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I'd agree. Well, and I mean, what brought you to your point of leadership here? Like, what is kind of your summary of your career path to get there, and what caused? I didn't say caused you, but what as you got the opportunity to get into leadership, what were aspects of that where you're like, I'm going to take the bull by the horns here, and I'm going to try to, you know, be a good leader.
Well, a lot of that came from the idea of, as an engineer, as somebody that's been in it for 18, almost 19 years, what was it that really stuck with me that felt like the leaders weren't understanding? Like people weren't understanding of how myself as an engineer needed them to help me lead or help them lead
Yeah.
me, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, and the longer that went on and the more I kind of dealt with it, I was just like, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And I got pretty lucky in that I started working. It was basically freelance for a guy out of Florida, and eventually just became too expensive to freelance because obviously he was paying me exorbitant rates. Um, and he was like, "Hey, can you just come on full time and just run our engineering team?" Which consisted of like two people, so it was kind of small. But I got my start with him because his WordPress site for one of his clients got hacked and it had porn all over it. And he was like, "Can you fix this?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I can fix it." I didn't know how to fix it, but I figured it out. And like eventually that just kind of rolled into a full-time position where I was doing all their WordPress development, managing the two engineers that we had, and honestly even helping manage the creative side of it. And then that eventually rolled into the first startup that I started with him and the other guy that was helping us run that marketing firm. And it just kind of snowballed from there. Started out just basically being the first guy to write code for that project, and they were like, "Hey, you've been doing this a while. Why don't you step up, take the CTO position, and help us figure out how to launch this startup?" So I was running VP of engineering for that marketing firm, but also doing the CTO duties for this new startup. And then eventually that team grew to 156 people here in Nashville. Um, you know, Unfortunately, obviously, that's no longer a thing, but that's at least how I got started into leadership. I mean,
Mhm.
I think there's a whole big picture thing that kind of extends way beyond that over the last 6 years. But we can leave that for a later venture because
Job
that's a big ask.
security
Yeah.
feature, yeah. Well, and you brought up a good aspect. The key point that I heard was when someone asked you if you could do something, you said yes. You took the reins, you took the responsibility and the ownership of that. Do you feel like that is an aspect, a trend in your leadership that's kind of rusted you into that CTO role or into others? Again, they're not technical, right? So they're just business people. We have that alone in that dichotomy there is definitely a translation issue of speaking what's going on from a technical standpoint and understanding it from a business standpoint and trying to marry those two.
Yeah,
But
and that's actually one of the things I struggled with whenever I first started doing CTO, and I'm pretty sure that even you've talked to me about this from when you got thrust into that CTO position. Um, because a lot of it's like we come from a background of we know all the technical aspects, but we're not business people. We don't know the ins and outs of how to deal with clients on the day to day basis with this stuff. And that was honestly the biggest thing that I struggled with whenever I started doing the VP of engineering and the CTO role. Yeah, so that was definitely rough.
Yeah, yeah, and I've noticed that in others too. It seems like when you can take ownership of that, when you control it, like you said, they had a problem. You said you could fix it, even though you knew behind the scenes you didn't know what you were doing or what it was. I would say what you didn't know what you were doing, but you didn't know what it was. We can always go learn. I mean, that's our field, right? In the technical field, you're always learning new things. It's one of the reasons I love it. But you showed a confidence to the non-technical side. Said, "Hey, I will take the reins of this. I will take control of it, and we'll figure it out." Then you walk away looking, out and calm, and then you get into the your side of the office. You're okay. I figured this out. Hello, Stack Overflow. Um,
Yeah.
I
What I
think
mean,
Go ahead.
I think that's what actually like kind of differentiates between people that have been doing this a while and people that haven't. I mean, there's obviously that experience there, but there's also the experience of knowing how to actually Google shit. Like,
Mhm.
because I can't memorize all this crap and I don't know what the hell is this thing? What is this doing? Like,
Yeah, I thought maybe someone's watching. You had a good idea.
um, oh,
My
that
past in my career is somewhat similar. I went into engineering school, computer software engineering, and then a handful of months outside of graduating, I had an opportunity to join a firm that didn't have any software development in house. They were outsourced and they were ready to kind of scale out. And I came in as a solo engineer, newbie. I consider myself a junior web dev. I always liked kind of the full stack experience, and there was some just confidence I walked around with. And honestly, it's probably because I didn't know what I didn't know, and was hired on as like employee number 10, and was pretty much dropped a list of papers. It was like a black and white PowerPoint slide. It said, "Hey, this is our trading platform. Build this." And I was in a sector I had no idea about, but I was like, "This is my time to make it and shine." And part of that, I was totally like, "Oh, I'll get this done for you." And then I would always run back, to my desk and spend my evenings just engrossed in, programming books, like I said, Googling, researching, finding out what I needed to do to build these requirements. Not only learning the business domain, but also learning the tech stack at an enterprise level. That's you outside of a boot camp in the schools, like you expand outside of those hello world scenarios, when you build project POCs and you realize, hey, I got to actually really think through the methodology of this architecture and what's going to work. And as the company grows, you realize, oh, hey, like I didn't build this as well enough. I got to refactor it and scale. So I always like to think that the pain driven development from my experiences is what's helped me in my leadership now these days, especially when I hire and train junior engineers. And again, making sure they're not experiencing the same woes that I experience.
But I
But
mean,
part of
it's a lot like kids in that aspect, though. You can lead them to water, but you can't really make them drink
Yeah,
it. So
one of my mentors, he always said there's a difference between a smart man and a wise man. That a smart man learns on his own, and a wise man learns from others. And sometimes you have to be a smart man. Sometimes you have to be a wise man. It very for me, I'm a very hands-on kinesthetic learner, and so I always wanted to be in the depth of it. That was one of my goals as I grew in my career and started taking on some of these leadership hats and was to make sure I didn't lose my technical skills. Because for me, that was kind of my self reliance. Like bare minimum, I can always program, I can always build out products, and I can always have something very tangible to compare and justify my existence there in my paychecks. And knowing that whatever was going to happen in my future, I could always rely on to those skill sets to carry me through whatever job, even if I had to go back to just being a normal, say, senior engineer and what comes with that pay rate, pay scale and whatnot. I always had that. I've seen a lot of leaders in my time that lose it or say, "Oh, I used to program back in the day. I don't anymore. So now I'm just big thought leaders." I've also had leaders in the technical field that aren't technical, and I think that those three types of leaders is a lot of different pros and cons between the three of them. Like for me, when I go into a company or I'm looking at a potential employment opportunity, those are attributes that I look at and think, is that the kind of day to day work I want to deal with? Because working with a technical leader and a non technical leader, it's two different approaches coming from an engineer or someone down further down that food chain. And so for me, as a leadership in dev, like I really wanted to focus on being the technical leader, but also, key word there is leadership. I never wanted to be a manager. Again, we work with adults. You talk about, teaching our kids. We work with adults. We got to treat each other like adults. Who works hard, what that hard line is and qualify is different for everyone. And so we're all got to put on our big kid pants and get through and have some of that. I know your big thing is serving and leadership, and really understand being able to talk to each other and take each other at the same level. Like you and I working together, when one's a man, the head, let's just say leading the others not, we still got to work as if we're a team. But there's always that head person, there's always that lead, there's always that, again, the corporate food chain, there's always a CTO or VP. But when we work together, the team, we have to work together at the same level to make sure the egos stay out of it. I think it's an important aspect of my leadership styles, at least as we've gone through that.
Well, I mean that's actually like that's really close to what servant leadership is being able to get into the trenches and not necessarily maybe code, but still being there to understand what it is they're doing, what it is they're going through, like, and help in any way you can. Like, and that's kind of like, I mean, we'll dive into this a little bit more here in a minute, but like, that's kind of always, well, not always, but it's since I kind of like understood and kind of got brought into servant leadership, that's kind of what I've been focused on. Because, in my opinion, if I take care of the engineers, they're going to take care of the company. I don't have to,
Yeah.
because they're going to be more bought into the process. They're going to be more bought into actually making sure that they do a good job. Um, and if they got a manager that doesn't really believe in what it is that they're supposed to be doing and doesn't try to support them, they're not going to give us shit. Like, they're going to be like, yeah, I'm here to collect a paycheck and walk out the door.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting an aspect of serving leadership too, and the idea of having kind of that safe environment. Um, as one that through my experience of it being the younger one on the team to being the leader to being back off of the leadership and having that experience but not being the leader in place, there's an interesting empathy always plays a big part for me in my experiences, because before I was that leader, listening to my leaders, hey, take your time, take days off, relax. I was like, no, 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 no. I got to focus. I have a deadline. I want to hit this. And then when I became the leader and, have to manage and make sure that the ones working with me are mentally strong, making sure the burnout's not there, making sure, hey, let's have the team relax this sprint potentially, right? Like, let's take a Friday off and let's just have a good time together. We all just need to kind of blow some steam. And I, as truthfully as I would say, hey, go home today at 1 o'clock and just take it easy. No one ever did, because it's like, for whatever reason, they're like, oh, my boss doesn't want me to take a day off. I got to work. And it was always a struggle for me because I was totally serious about it. And like, no one ever took me up on it. And then now on the next step, I have a manager that says that all to me all the time when I'm stressed. And I fail to listen to him sometimes. Like, no, no, I'll just keep working. I'll get through this. It's all right. I'm not going to take the day off and be fine. And so I do what those that I worked with before were doing. And I always wondered why, like, why being the one that didn't understand the empathy, then being the one giving the empathy, and then now receiving the empathy, how that, acting on that and feeling truthful about that changes depending on where you're at in that hierarchy.
What I mean, that's the whenever I met you, I was actually brought back in as a senior software engineer. I had technically come from the company before. where I had started the company as the CTO and then transitioned to CIO. But then after a little while, it was just like, okay, I'm working like 89. Here we go again. What the hell?
It's because you hold your hands up.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm expressive. Um, but like after working 80, 90 hours, like for 3 years straight, it was just like I can't do this anymore. And I stepped back and actually went over to the product side of things and tried to like get used to the way product was done and learn more about the actual product side of things. And then eventually transition back over into engineering as a program manager. And it was just like coming out of like all of those leadership roles and then coming over into senior engineer at the company that we met at, it was weird. Like because
Mhm.
was so used to, even when I wasn't in management at that previous company, I was still one of the founders. So like it was like people were like, "Hey, if you need something, go ask Aaron. If you need to know something, go ask Aaron. He's like the historian for the company." And so it was just like it was that leadership, but not leadership. So like, and that's actually kind of what kickstarted my view of like what the servant leadership style that I wanted to do was. I mean, like as I was, CTO and CIO, it definitely kind of pushed in that direction. But as I was starting to realize that people still saw me as a leader at this company without necessarily being one of the managers, it was kind of like, oh, okay, this makes a little more sense. And now I kind of understand why I enjoy this kind of stuff because generally I'm not a people person. I don't really like people all that much. But when it comes to work, like being able to give these people what they need and help them grow and help them like help the company. That was a huge cement point for me. Like it was
Mhm.
like, yeah, okay, this is kind of what I enjoy. This is what I want to do. But I still enjoy coding, so it's kind of like a weird catch 22.
Till you get that bug and you just can't figure it out and you do the same thing, repeat, rinse, repeat, and then eventually it starts working. And you're like, why is it working? I don't know. I didn't do anything different. It's working now.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the reasons why people like me and you, like we get into these positions where we're helping build these companies, and like, and then we see other people helping us build these companies, and it's just like I probably wouldn't do it that way, but it's not my company, so I can't do anything about it. So it's like that's one of the reasons why we code outside of work because we're like, well, if I'm ever going to be able to run a company the way I want, it's probably going to have to be my own company.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. I would say that's kind of how my trajectory changed. Um, I didn't necessarily, I was greedy and I was selfish in the sense that I didn't want someone to tell me what to do and what not to do in the sense of quality of code. Sometimes I hear, do XYZ as a requirement. I'm like, oh, if we just did a little bit more, though, we could do this. Well, I wouldn't say I'm always the innovative one, but technology for me is kind of my identity in my life. When I'm hanging out, after hours and for entertainment myself, I'm listening to tech podcasts. I always laugh as my wife and I get ready for bed. She'll be over, reading Jane Austen to relax, and I'm over here reading a technical document or some sort of Microsoft doc on a service just because I'm a weirdo. And earlier in my career in the 20, my mid 20s and late 20s, like I ate, slept, drank, I bled, you know, code. And so I when the opportunity arose and opened up for a leader, I just went to the partner and said, I want it. And if you're going to go and hire other people or interview other people, I want to be in that list. And luckily for me, again, being in a smaller company, having some of that domain experience, also, being the godfather of the code stack, so to speak, it was really easy to kind of pop me into those positions. And I honestly do. I went from just like a normal dev with like two or three of us to, lead dev, kind of similar to you, like that team lead of over two or three and over a product to director of engineering, which again was a small group of us that followed, but was able to be the spearhead thought process of the technology that's being delivered at the company. And really, you could see kind of Brian's DNA through it all and where we wanted to push. And so it was really selfish of me, to be honest, because I just didn't want someone to come in and tell me what to do. I didn't want a non-technical leader say, "Hey, Brian, this is how you run a sprint, and tell me the why you're doing it this way." It's like I know why we're doing it this way. Let me go do it. I
But
will
I mean,
explain to business people that pay my checks.
I think that that's actually a big part of how people that are, well, I mean, I say this for me, I don't actually know your background in this, and so that may be something we need to touch on. But I'm completely self-taught. My degree is in 3D animation and videography, so like I had one coding class. It was like HTML transitional 4.1 or whatever the hell it was back then. And, like I realized, okay, I can't really get a job doing 3D animation in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I should probably figure out what to do. So, and my first coding thing was I was hacking MySpace pages to make them look
Oh
pretty or whatever.
yes, you and
Um,
Tom best friends.
Oh yeah, totally. But I mean, that's part of the weird part about it, because like when we were talking to the junior engineers that work for us now, and the people that have kind of been on our teams over the years, like they don't even remember MySpace. They're like, "Oh, wasn't that like the precursor to Facebook?" And it's like, well, yeah, technically, but it was.
GeoCities, baby. It's all about GeoCities.
That's like the GIF versus GIF thing. It's Geocities.
GeoCities. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I like GeoCities.
So are you like kind of like, I don't think I've ever actually asked you that. Like, have you like, are you pretty much self-taught? Do you have like an actual degree in
No,
coding?
no, I paid a ton of money for student loans to formally be taught and have a piece of paper that says I know what I'm doing. Yeah, so I've always kind of been a maker, I guess the modern day term's a maker, hands-on stuff. I used to tear apart my dad's lawnmowers and break them to figure out how the engines work. I had a few dirt bikes growing up that I tore apart the engines to understand the carburetors and really, could never really fully put it back together again. And just always curious. I was just always wondering, like, how does this work? Um, and so that as I got older and I got into computers, that's back when like it was like the GeForce 3 was the big video card. Pentium 2s were the big machines, you're playing Command and Conquer, Red Alert, and Earthlink Internet, and Napster. Yeah, that's the era where I started getting into technology. And it was really building computers. We built gaming PCs. And then I had a good friend of mine that we would do, we built our machines together, and other people realized we could do that. So instead of buying their gateway, they asked us to build one. So we'd run a Newegg, ask their budget. We go to newegg.com, build a computer out for them. And everyone thought we were so cool and smart. And you didn't realize that, hey, you just put the blue connector into the blue slot and the red connector into the red slot. And ta-da. But for my career, honestly, for my life and my career, I always wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Navy. I embodied
Astronaut.
Yeah, I embodied Maverick and Goose from Top Gun. I wanted to be Maverick, but I loved Goose. I always wanted to fly. I love adrenaline. I love speed. And I just thought it was badass to be like, why wouldn't you not want to fly these fighter jets? And just like, there's no, like, it's so small of a group that it's the ultimate flex. Right there with an astronaut, it's even smaller of a group of a flex. But I've always loved speed. There's something about the adrenaline for me and controlling the chaos that has always been enticing. And then, of course, later in my years, when I was 18, for whatever reasons, I was kind of medically disqualified to join that. And my buddy, who we built these machines with, heard about this school programming. So back then it was called Newmont University, but now it's Newmont College of Computer Science. And he was like, dude, let's go to this school. It's a 2-year bachelor program. We'll go together. We'll be roommates. We'll start a company and we'll have a blast. And I was like, all right, let's do this. Literally from that conversation and starting school was 3 weeks. And I
Oh
had to have a
God.
phone interview with one of the guys to see, screen to get in. And I remember again, I have no programming experience, right? We've read a few of those like Learn C++ 24 hours books, and you get 2 chapters into.
Oh, he gone.
3 hours later.
So yeah, to kind of real quick. So interview process, Newmont guy, professor calls me for this screening interview, asked me what programming I would like to do or would be considered. So I opened Google real quick and just like on the fly, just software programming. And CPU programming was the first thing that came up. Wikipedia, CPU program. And I was like, oh, I would love to, program for some hardware and I'm seeing, CPU realm and compute. And he's like, oh, I did that in my career. And I was just like, oh no, I'm not, I'm faking it. And he caught me. I'm never getting in. And it's kind of funny because I let him just kind of take the conversation and, talk about himself. And I got in. So from going to this programming school to starting school, 3 weeks, and my life took a left turn, and I've been writing that ever since.
Yeah, and that
Um, yeah,
yeah, and
so
that
that's
actually
kind of
led
how I got
to
into it.
where you're at now, which is Microsoft, which is kind of like I know whenever we talked when we were at that company together, we talked and you were like, look, this is kind of what I've been aiming for most of my career is to get somewhere like Microsoft. So congrats on finally getting that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely it's a lot of hard work. It's more hard work than I thought would entail, as well as experience. Yeah, I was always curious, kind of what it was like to be at a big company compared to a small company. Wearing all the hats, wearing specified specific hats now, and having the talent for what I do has been great. To leverage my skill sets of what I'm good at to where work, even though it's still work, like it's not nearly as hard because I'm doing a few things that I do really well. And so it's kind of nice to refine those tools, but also to kind of automate a lot of things. Then to always, the daily fire that's going on and some out in left field you got to
So
solve. And so, yeah,
so how
I
does I know how things kind of go with these smaller companies and with these startups. I mean, that's most of my career has been startups and small companies. Like I'm in East Tennessee, so I guess that's kind of a given. But how do you handle servant leadership at Microsoft? Like, how is it like? Is it like a corporate thing, or is it more individualized for each leader, or how do you guys branch that out?
Yeah, one thing that's been surprising for me when I started Microsoft. So from the recording of this episode, I've been in Microsoft 2.5 years, working on as a cloud solution architect, app innovation space. So software engineer within the PaaS resources of Azure, and helping customers either migrate to the cloud or best architect solutions for them with the given resources and kind of picking up their own journey and then making sure we're bulletproof on that process and reliability and stability and whatnot. And what's cool about Microsoft is their marketing about their culture and their real life culture are the same thing. Which honestly, I was very surprised because I've been in a handful of companies where like, we're all good. And then you go into it and you're like, sure, that was fun. Maybe there's smoke and mirrors or good intentions, but it's not executed day in and day out. Um, I think in my specific niche of engineers, I'm one of the youngest ones on the team. I have a handful that have been in Microsoft for as long as my career has been, and they have their pain-driven development experiences, and there are a lot of wise men that I can rely on and listen to, and try to upskill myself, listen to them. But management there, from a perspective of day to day, compared to like a development manager and leader, is kind of automatic in the sense that we hire a personality where we're self-sufficient. We try to be as much as possible. And so for a manager, it's like you have a bunch of A-listers just going for it and trying to hit that goal as hard as they can. And really, from a management perspective, our managers mainly focus that there's 9 levels between of managers between my manager and Satya. And within all of those tiers, there's certain corporate
Mhm.
targets data or KPIs. And the world of Microsoft being inside is almost as big as the outside development world that I've, tried to corral and understand. So there's a lot of things going on within Microsoft that I have no clue about. And so a lot of times my manager is facilitating that we correlate my work with those KPIs and just make sure everything's in line from an expectation from his manager up, as well as honestly just, hey, Brian, do you need anything? You know, I'll do certain type of work because we can kind of be self-forming and find our niches where we go work really well. And he sees that little bit of light, or like he understands that that could be big somewhere else in the cloud or in the company. and goes, "Hey, Brian, let's take that topic and let's go show this other group of people and let's go be successful there." And so, honestly, he's very much my manager has been my agent, so to speak. You think of the movie stars and music musicians and actors, and sports athletes, they have agents to help make sure that they are maximizing their performance as well as their return and success. And honestly, I think my manager has been my agent within Microsoft to help lead my success
What I mean,
in
I
my
think that's
recent
actually a
career.
big part of the kind of like the 10 principles. I mean, obviously, I sent you that pre-reading, and I done a little more research, like because I've kind of been practicing service leadership for pretty much as long as I've been leading teams for the past 8 years, but also like even more so as I'm starting to be like, okay, this is something that's actually really important to me. But I sent you the 10 Principles of Servant Leadership by Robert K. Greenleaf, and like it really feels like from what you've kind of said is that Microsoft is actively focusing on 4 or 5 of those key areas on a regular basis, and that's usually from what I've been experiencing is actually kind of unheard of. Like there's a lot of companies, especially right now. We had the huge issue with the pandemic, and like subjectively, we may never get fully out of that. Um, yeah,
Remote work
well,
is number one now. Yeah. And then that changes a lot of dynamics in leadership, and I think that there are people that have been able to leverage it and succeed. I think there's other that have been able to just get by the bare minimum of that in the median, and I think there's other leaders that have honestly struggled really hard, whether it be personally or just technology wise. Just they can't get a grasp on it, and I think that it's put a lot of overhead and stress on that manager that's supposed to be able to handle the
yeah.
stress for their team. And that just puts it in another conundrum of another things spinning on another axis and trying to control that to make sure you can be in that cadence and
When
standards and
I
moving
think that
forward with
actually shows the
productivity.
adaptability of certain leaders, and like I think that's something that's actually lacking in a lot of the engineering space, and I'm probably going to catch flack for that. But like
Yeah.
the ability to adapt to whether or not it's remote, whether or not it's in office. Like I can work in office. I proved it, and then I've proven that I can work remotely for 8 years. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
Like, why would I not want to make it so that I can spend more time with my family, so my engineers can spend more time with their family, or spend more time doing what they enjoy, which is going to make them happier and make them work better. Um,
Yeah. I think I struggled. So I had one remote engineer. So my friend that I went to school with, he and I have been working together at this company I was at for many years, and he was the one remote worker we had. And I, as a leader, I now looking back after years of remote work because of COVID, as well as then becoming a remote worker myself. Honestly, I look back and my judgment of my performance for him was I let him down drastically because I did not put enough effort into making sure that he was just not the single man on the island from a technology standpoint, as well as just a personal skill standpoint. To where for me at that given time, if I was to go back to Brian in that position before COVID, I would say it was easier. It would have been easier to get rid of him and to bring someone in house to be successful than it was to try to make sure he was most successful as a remote individual. Because again, he was the only one, so he's a lone man on the island. Um, and some of those constraints of that leadership were just because I didn't have funding or I didn't have the tools. But a big one, it was just I didn't know how to work it. I didn't know how to be effective. He was pretty much sitting on a conference call where we're doing like a daily stand up, whiteboarding things, and he's like having to use his imagination of these diagrams because you know interactive whiteboarding software really wasn't a thing. Like
yeah,
people had it, but it didn't work well. Let alone say, hey, I'm going to buy him a device that is a tablet just for him to then write back. This is like I'm not paying $1,000 on a device for him to whiteboard. You're like, no, it's in webcams. If this was a whiteboard back here, that wouldn't really work. So there was just a big gap from a technology standpoint to be super effective, and I let him down to be honest, in my opinion, because he could have been better productivity wise, and he probably morale wise, he probably would have been more happier. I would assume he struggled with a lot of things that he
Yeah.
never talked to me about.
Well, I mean, that kind of like
So
shows, it kind of brings up 2 points, honestly, and that's the fact that now that we have the technological advancements that we have compared to 10 years ago, 8 years ago, however long, is astronomical. Yeah, right. It's
4 years ago,
astronomically
yeah,
different. So it
yeah,
makes more sense now than it ever has for remote work. But also the fact that you were willing to say, I let him down, because I think there's definitely obviously you're like in a senior position right now, but you're not a leader, I guess. Which, but I mean, you're
yeah,
still in
yeah,
that senior position, so that you are still mentoring people. You're still helping lead those junior and mid levels. Being able to take a
Mhm.
step back and be like, look, my responsibility is to them. It's not the other way around. It's not them beholden to what my whims are. It's you're helping them, like you're helping them become a better engineers so that they help the company. And being able to take a step back and see that is a huge part of what I feel like servant leadership is. I mean, obviously everybody has their own concepts of what servant leadership really is for them, and that kind of like just points out the main piece of that, in that servant leadership has a definition. It has certain, the 10 principles that Greenleaf defined, but it's about what works for that team. Those 10 principles, while really good and something that should be, kind of practiced across the board, not just in engineering, um, some of those just don't fit in the way that, certain teams run. But the biggest parts of
yeah,
those, which you kind of touched on with your boss being your manager, or not your manager, agent, is stewardship, and being able to like go back and
mhm.
actually steward this person's career along. I mean, that's your job.
Yeah, yep, yep. And at Microsoft, we talk about there's three forms of impact. And since they are a big company, and it's not like they're going to go out of business tomorrow, we have the opportunity to, yeah, right. I got it. Maybe in 3 days, but not tomorrow. Uh, but so I have my KPIs and my job, let's say primary job responsibilities. But if there's a lot of other ways to lead the impact, and the culmination of all those different ways of leading that impact is what we connect with, that managers read to see how we are as an employee, and if we're bettering the environment that we're in. For instance, I run the Salt Lake Azure user group here where I live for the last 5.5 years. Something that I've been running on the side for fun, with a co-founder of mine, Troy Fillerup, and giving back to the community, since we've been given to the community, taken from the community for so long in my career. But that was something I had to do on the side for work, right? That was an evenings thing. That was a prep presentations at night. That was, help solidify this group together at night, and that's personal time. That's personal time with my kids, my spouse. And Microsoft, they're like, you know what? This is helping the community. Like that, slice some of your day out to handle that in your work day. And so I can lead impact and be a successful employee with driving other things that may not be my primary responsibility. Another aspect of that too is I'm part of a mentoring network for Microsoft's Founders Hub. So we have startup uh, companies that are applying, and I have the opportunity, if they want to talk to me, to mentor about how to be in the cloud, things to look out for, how to best prep, and share my experience and my knowledge with those that don't know anything related to being a programmer in that deep tech, um, that leads impact. And my agent, my manager, sees that and goes, "Oh, hey, let's make sure we spotlight that for you, so that the higher ups see that you're known to do these things." And so that's really, yeah, to my being my agent. Um, he's been fantastic, because I wouldn't know how to do that, and I'm not one to just sit here like, "Yeah, look at Brian, oh, he's amazing." And we have to kind of write a connect, every 6 months in that sense. But it's really just to demonstrate the impacts we lead. And he does a really good job of maximizing that impact for all of us and everyone on the team. It's just not me, it's everyone that works under him. And it's been great. It's definitely different, because sometimes, you probably have experienced this too. When you are in that leadership position, it's lonely up top, right? Like as you get up that notch, to me, it's always been a lateral jump, right? It's kind of like a military progression type thing. Like once you're CTO, like you are the top dog. And when shit hits the fan and you're stressed out, you're burnt out because things aren't working, you're not hands on everything, who do you go and vent to? Who do you go talk to and soundboard to? When you're similar in the team, you have teammates and you can vent and bitch and complain about upper management, whoever you want all the time, and, relieve that stress. But when you're that guy, that person, that professional, you can't, gripe. It's similar like Saving Private Ryan. There's a quote, this World War II movie, Tom Hanks, about, his platoon or a group of men arguing. And he says, I gripe up the ladder. I don't gripe down the ladder because he just wasn't connecting with his men. And I watched it as a kid. To me, that made sense. Like it goes up, but when you're at the top, who do you gripe to?
What I mean,
It's
I think
lonely.
that's actually a difference that you and I have, and it's a difference in our leadership styles, and like, so for me, like, I'm very adamant about being brutally honest, and people overuse that term in my opinion, but I'm brutally honest about things that I can be brutally honest about. I mean, obviously, when it comes down to certain things like a riff or something like that. Um, you can't really say anything. They're like, "Hey, we're going to lay off these 13 people tomorrow," and it's just like, "Oh, well, fuck that. Thanks for telling me that." Like now, I feel like a horrible
Yeah,
piece of shit because I can't go tell these
yeah,
people. So there are some things that you can't really tell them, but there is absolutely no reason, in my opinion, why if you're talking to another engineer, yes, they may be your junior engineer or whatever they are if you're a software engineering manager, um, but being honest with them is part of it, and like treating them like an adult, like you were talking about earlier, is basically understanding that they can handle that information, and if they can't handle information that may be negative, maybe they're not right for the team anyway. um, I mean, granted,
yeah,
that's obviously the way I lead, and I'm a little bit different than some, and I've kind of like fostered my career in this web house slash startup industry type vertical, so it's a little bit different than it is at say Microsoft. So we do definitely have those differing opinions and different experiences, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah. Well, and part of that empathy too, and being brutally honest, like so, Brene Brown, she talks about rumbling in groups, and I think there's multiple aspects to this, and again, this can go deep into a lot of stuff, but I think part of being in that leadership position and being honest with people in the sense of to go back to my griping thing, when we have stressors, we're all used to complaining to each other. It kind of gets you through, right? You laugh in the stressful situations. You make funny of bad situations. Again, think World War II, these soldiers, they're laughing at each other while they're in the middle of this battle, gruesome war. But it's a way you cope and process as a human. But as a CTO, as a leader, it's you can't necessarily gripe the process because, in my opinion, you kind of lose some integrity. You also can risk losing some faith in those that are working with you to follow you. But at the same time, I think there's parts of, you know, being ready to rumble to say, hey, things are going to get rough. We have to do request XYZ from the company. You're going to hate it. I know you're going to hate this. And you're going to think it's a silly requirement or feature or project, or it makes us take a left turn from our ultimate goal for the end of the year. Um, but let's do it together. Let's make sure we're together. And then as a leader, making sure you're part of that process. Suffering that foxhole together. Um, some of and I don't know. I'd have to talk to the individual, but there are times when we have like those midnight deploys, right? Like it's or a bad deploy where you're working 24 hours a day. You're in the office at night, and there were deploy times like that where I honestly couldn't program the feature. I couldn't help, but I had decided to stay there with them overnight just to be with them, to chit chat, to talk about things. When you needed to take a break, we went to the break room and, we got some snacks and just walked around. I could easily have sat home. But one, I wanted to make sure I was there for him if he needed anything. And if I could help in some little way, I could help. but two, I knew that it would build trust with him, knowing that I was there with them, that he would see that his
Yep.
leadership sees him working hard. I think is a big one. And not having to toot. He wasn't one to toot his own horn, but I could see that, and I could retell people, "Hey, man, this person put in all this extra work. His diligence and his integrity is there to make sure what he deployed succeeded, even though it
What I mean,
didn't initially." I don't know if he sees it the same way, but that was my intent to in that
what I mean, that's
specific moment.
it's funny you say that because we have a deploy for my day job starting at 9 o'clock, and those usually run till like 1 a.m. And it's there's usually quite a few people in there. We usually have all the product owners. We have the VP of product. I almost always try to get on there, even though, like you said, I don't know how to fix it. I mean, uh, I got into a weird position where I don't know Java, but I work at a Java house, and I mean, I've been doing programming long enough to where it's yeah, right.
You're that
I'm
weird
the
guy in
like
the group.
node, but I've been in it long enough to where I can jump into Java and code something if they just tell me what they need it to do. But as far as like taking what they've built and deploy it and fix it if it breaks, I don't know how to do that. Like, so I am literally there to help
Yeah,
emotional support. And I mean, it's weird because it's one of those things that you kind of
yeah,
struggle with as a leader because you're like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm leading these people. It's like that imposter syndrome.
when you come from yeah, and you come from being a technical background and being the hands-on keyboard, and so you're like, how do I help here? I need to help. I need to justify being here. Let me help when you can't. And if you do, in some aspects, it almost delays
Yeah,
and
because
is
you're
a
just getting
bigger
in the way of
roadblock.
something they already know how to do.
But identifying that too. Yeah, and I'd say identifying that, knowing, hey, if I get out of the way, they're going to move better. And people love, as a man, I've had a lot of times where I wish my manager would just get out of the damn way so that I could get it across the finish line faster than we needed to, or that we would have if
Yeah,
with him being there. And I think that's a key aspect too of your technical background, your understanding of what it was like. And when you're in that position, okay, hold on here. I'm going to be a wallflower here, and I'm going to look out. I'm going to look through the processes your group is interacting and talking, picking up and seeing where maybe people are getting frustrated, tired, and angry, and short with each other. So you can say, all right, let's take a break, or you can see the forest
yeah.
through the trees when you take a step back. I think is a key
But
aspect
it's
of
kind
that
of funny, but that
process.
we've talked about like and like the three principles that kind of aren't that are part of how I do servant leadership, but aren't necessarily a part of Greenleaf's 10. And we've touched on all three of those in the past
Mhm.
10 minutes, and that's honesty, self awareness, and keeping it funny. And I mean, that last one, it's
Yeah,
weird because when you're on these deploys at 9, 10 o'clock at night, and they're just like trying to power through it, like that's a big way you can help because they're seeing that it's not all just doom and gloom. It's like, oh great, it's fucking broke. Be like, hey, it
yeah,
could have been worse, it could have been this guy's fault. And it's just like, well, he's not even, oh okay, I see what you're doing now. So it's that's part
yeah,
of
yeah,
it. And I
yeah.
mean, like I've had to actually develop more of a sense of humor since becoming a leader because if you ask my partner or any of my past partners, I'm super serious. Like Aaron probably doesn't have a sense of humor about things, and I've had to grow one because like these engineers, thankfully they understand my engineering humor, but at the same time, like you have to learn to be able to work with each of these engineers' personalities, and that's been a big part of my leadership growth is learning how to do that and learning what their um, sense of humors are, I guess, and like being able to play to that. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's one of those weird things
Yeah,
that people
yeah,
don't really talk about with leadership. It's like because if you're honest with your people, you're self-aware of the process, and then you can actually make them laugh, you're going to be a favorite manager. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's
yeah,
because managers are notorious for just being like, why aren't you getting this done? Why isn't it done? Like, why do you suck? It's like so.
yeah, yeah. When you can read all the blogs online and all the stories, the difference between manager and leader, and I think manager has a bad taste in everyone's mouth historically. I think a manager can be a leader, and those two words are synonymous, in their place. But yeah, I think taking it easy and lighthearted, like, and I don't, maybe that's rare with our field because we all know shit hits the fan at times. Given the best freaking preparation, the best planning, all the squares and pointy arrows and your architectural diagrams and data flows and everywhere. We have unit tests that are a lot easier to implement now. We have IDEs that talk about build errors all the time. We have CI/CD that gets the person out of the process to screw it up. But yet, it still happens. And sometimes that's the funny part. Is like, well, if we just shot from the hip like we used to, at least we would have been at this point 2 weeks ago and still solving the problem that we're trying to solve right now. And it comes down to, I always joke with my wife that, hey, we missed a semicolon somewhere, or a greater than sign was, a less than sign in an if statement during an iteration loop. And then bam, there's that
Uh,
left field error. And it's always
every
something
time
small
that
like
I'm
that.
like, because there's that conundrum of my code works, I don't know why. My code doesn't work, I don't know why. And every time I get to that point where I'm literally like ready to just punch my fucking monitor and just like blast that thing, my partner will look at me and be like, "Did you miss a semicolon somewhere?" And I'm like, "God damn it!" And like, sometimes it is.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
like, we were working through Terraform shit the other day at work, and my coworker was just like, "What the fuck? Why is this not working?" And like, him and I are both pretty versed in Terraform, and we're working through it, and we're just like, "What the fuck is going on here?" And come to find out, the error message was telling us what was wrong. We just didn't read the error message right. Yeah, and then
Yeah, didn't read
once
the
we
whole way,
did, we
right?
were like, "Oh, son of a bitch, we're both
Yeah.
stupid."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Or you scan through the documents left and right trying to look for that right screenshot when you're like, well, if I spent half the time I did surfing reading this one page,
So,
I would have had the answer right there. Yeah. Then you got to take those moments, you got to laugh at that, right? You're like, oh, I knew it. Or anytime you copy paste, there's always an error in your code and you're like fighting it for however long. And then you eventually come back like, oh, that's right. It was a bad copy paste. I know not to
that
copy and paste,
that
but I
boys
still
and
do it for speed. And
that
then it
boys and
always
girls is
ends
why
up
it's important to
miserably.
use ESLint. So, like, when it comes to
Uh,
leadership, though, like, what are your key takeaways from, like, kind of what we've talked about with servant leadership? And I mean, we could go on and on and on about this. Like, you and I are both, well, like, when we start talking, it basically just turns into a podcast episode. So, which we've joked about before. So, like, what are those key aspects for
yeah.
you that like really, even since you have taken a step back from leadership and you are like kind of like, you're still a leader but like a little less involved and more removed from the process, but like, what do you feel like you want to embody, but also that really cements what your manager does or your leader does, to kind of make you feel like they are a servant leader?
That was a good question. I think over communicating is something that I learned it was important when I was in that step that I try to give to my manager. We can call it empathy as well, but I would just say the ability to try to understand where each other's coming from each position, especially now where my manager's coming down trying to push stuff and me going, well, this process isn't going to work when I implement it. And I know it. But I know that my manager can't necessarily change that system because it was 3 skip levels up that came up with the process. So at the same time, instead of just complaining all the time, it's like complain, but try to come up with a solution or a way of trying to implement it because it just makes your manager's life easier. And if you know what's going to make his life easier and what he does have control over, or she has control over,
Yeah.
work on that. There's venting to vent. Great. That's not for your manager. That's for your coworkers. It's for the rubber ducky that's sitting on your desk. But you know, I always wanted people to kind of communicate with me, and be honest. But also, and I understand complaining, I understand venting, even processes I came out with. But come to me with some solutions as well, so we can better it for ourselves going down the future. And so I try now that the roles are reversed, I try to do that as well. I don't know if that's what
That's
my
what he
manager
gets.
wants, but from my perspective, yeah, that's what he's going to get. Like I said, over communication because you don't want those assumptions. I always called it a assumption of knowledge, and you just assume the way you're regurgitating and speaking what needs to be done this sprint, so to speak, that everyone understands their tasks and jobs for that sprint. When I would probably say 80% of the time it's not. They heard it differently. And I always loved Ted Lasso. There's a Ted Lasso quote where he's talking to the group and he's always like, you know what, assume means, right? It makes an ass out of you and me. And I always loved it because it's true. You can't assume. You got to really clear and go, okay, I said this. What did you get from it, Aaron? And regurgitate back to me what you heard. So then we both know what I said and what you heard are the same thing. And if
Yeah.
they're not, then we need to refine that. So I think honestly, in the body is that communication and just being
Well,
honest
and I
with that
mean that
communication.
also like kind of plays into. I mean, I've been writing articles on LinkedIn to kind of promote myself, just to try to make it easier to employ if I ever get laid off again. But one of the other articles
Yeah.
that I wrote was about effective leadership for remote workers, and over communicating is one of those key aspects. You know, I've always been the type of person that I'll over communicate to the point where they're just like, "Can you please stop talking?" Um, and that honestly is a godsend for me because when I'm working with these product owners and product managers, they're just like, "Hey, I love that you're over communicating because I never have to wonder what you're thinking or what you're doing." You know, we always know. And
Exactly.
as you kind of work into that leadership position, your engineers are the same way. Like the more you talk to them and the more you can try to communicate with them. I mean, obviously each person's different. Some of them require a lot less communication. So like over communicating for them may be different than over communicating for, but Bob. But it's a huge
Yep.
aspect of it. I didn't really work that into my servant leadership. I didn't really think about that. So thanks for making it look bad. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and like,
What
well,
about
and I
you?
mean it honestly like, and that just proves the point that servant leadership is an open-ended thing. It's about what makes the team, whether they be engineers or product people or whatever. It's about what makes them feel like they belong, like they're a part of this. They're not a cog in the wheel. Um, and it's a little bit
Yep.
easier at startups, because even small changes at a startup can make a huge change, like even bigger. You have that power to drive that change at a startup, whereas I would imagine at Microsoft, like it's a little bit harder to make a huge change with such a large company. When there's like 50, 60 people,
Yes.
it's like one
Yeah.
person could fuck that company hardcore. um
Yeah. Yeah. There's processes I've been working on that I know in my previous employments I would probably be able to get done in 2 months. And in this particular process, it's been a year and 3, 4 months, and it's still chugging deep, which I never quite understood how that, like, how could someone take so long to do X, Y, Z? And now I'm experiencing that side of the coin. You're like, okay, good to know. Like, it's just, I'm always curious, like, why, how? And so that's one of the things I've enjoyed of going from the small company to the bigger company. It's just seeing those things. And then empathy. I love, I think it's gonna be our new buzzword. I think we've said it 100 times this, but to understand perspectives and really go, okay, I can see why you're coming from, this angle because of what you know or what you've known.
What I think
And let's find that middle
self-awareness
ground.
and empathy should go a lot more hand in hand than they have, kind of historically, especially in the software engineering industry. God, I can't talk. Um, because like,
Mhm.
right.
It's been a while.
So it's like you can have empathy towards your engineers, and I think the bigger part of that and what is needed to make that empathy seem well founded and not just an afterthought and just like not something you're doing as lip service is having the self-awareness to know that you're not going to know everything, you're not going to be able to do everything they need, but continuously working with them to make sure they do have what they need. And some of that self-awareness comes back to like we were talking about with imposter syndrome. It's like I'm leading a team of engineers, but I guarantee all those engineers could run circles around me and code, but they may not have the leadership sensibilities that I have. They may not have that experience that I have to build on that. And having the self-awareness that, hey, they're smarter than I am. Like you need to be aware of that. And being able to be aware of that is part of the reason that you can be a good leader, is because you're like, look, I know you're better than this than I am. Let's think about it from a different perspective. Let's think about it from the product perspective. And that's where that leadership mentality comes into play, is you're trying to move them in the direction that they need to, that eventually they'll replace you. Which, I mean, I know
Mhm.
people are like, "Oh God, replace me? What the fuck? Why would you suggest that?" But it's just like it's kind of like my kids. Like I teach my kids. Yeah,
You
well, right.
replace the kids.
Um,
Excuse me, been
they're
too
gonna
long.
replace me. I mean, the 18-year-old's already getting there. But like being able to like go to the kids and like, I was raised a certain way, but I want to make sure that I raise them in a better way. I mean, does that mean that I'm not going to make mistakes? No, I'm going to fuck up a lot, and these kids are probably going to be mentally screwed because of me. But at the same time, it's just like they are a better version of what I am, and that's our gift to this world. I mean, granted, my kids are kind of
Yeah,
weird anyway, so that, hey, world, that's my gift. But it's we need to leave it a better place, and that's we can do that in the leadership aspect as well, and being able to teach these younger
yeah,
engineers how they should lead their teams in the future by showing them how to lead it is like my
yeah.
biggest thing, and that's what I'm passionate about, obviously.
Yeah. And that should be like a normal thread of our environment, of our workplace in that sector. But I knew I always leveraged it as an advantage when I was hiring, interviewing engineers at whatever level. I always promised them that you will leave here a better engineer than when you came in. Like, let's learn, we grow. Growth eventually comes out. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I left from a place, is because I just kind of grew out of where the company needed it. And just, you know, future foresight was just different trajectories, different targets. And, but I think it's, I would say that's a whole nother episode, honestly, is talking about being confident in your team growing and becoming better, even though you may not be in the way you're seeing it. That imposter syndrome never goes away, at least from my
No.
experience. Starting a podcast, it's, oh, what? I've been in the field for how long? Oh, I can't do that. I
Yeah,
can't do
for
this
real, and
podcast. No one wants to
that's
listen to
definitely
me.
something
Well,
that's something that I
why
think
not?
we're both
Right?
going to end up struggling with until we actually start getting a following, and even then, so I think um
Even that following, a lot of people are actually
it's like,
listening. I mean, you're just sitting on the other side of the door in the dark, just talking to me. So, you know,
well, I mean, that's it's kind of funny because since I've brought this up, and I know since you've brought this up to the people that we talk to on a daily basis, I've got like 4 or 5 people that I've worked with in the industry that are like, "Hey, do you need somebody to come on and talk about this?" Like I had one today, like one of the DevOps engineers I'm working with,
yeah,
because one of the things I want to do with this podcast is to kind of focus on the people that don't get focused on these tech podcasts, and kind of see what they deal with on a daily
mhm,
basis and how they work through that. He was just like, "Hey, wait a minute,
yeah,
what, you're doing a podcast?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's called WhatTheActualDev." And he was like, "Okay, that sounds interesting. Do you need someone on it?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, if you're interested." And he was just like, "Wait, I get to tell
totally.
people all the bullshit I'm dealing with and just get to put that out there?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I mean, obviously, we like to have someone like kind of give ways to handle that so it can't all be negative. And he was just like, "Sign me up. I'm done."
You can
Yeah,
complain,
exactly.
but come to me with a solution, please. That's all I ask. Yeah, it may not work, and everybody writes, but come to me with a
Yeah.
suggestion of how to solve the
Yeah, and
problem.
that's
I love it.
so. I mean,
Love it.
obviously, some of the episodes we have coming that we're still trying to get scheduled, and everything is like scaling the team as an engineering manager, like how you kind of grow that team, like what you look for, like and I'm kind
Yeah.
of like with that one in particular, I'm focusing or want to focus on how do we get information out there for people that may be looking for these jobs, engineers that either were recently laid off or that are just starting their career. Like what are we looking for as engineers, or the leadership in these engineering teams, and get that information out there. I want to try to help people
Yes.
get that information out there. And
Yes.
we've got a good friend of mine, Andrew Coleman, who's going to come on and kind of talk through that with us. He worked with me at that original startup right before I met you. So yeah, we've got a lot of good things coming. I think the other big one for me, and like, I mean, obviously, I want to kind of get an idea of what you're looking forward to going forward. But I think another thing is the one that actually got brought up to me by you from your wife, and that's what it's like to be a wife to an engineer. What's the bullshit they deal with?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, because I know that my
Yeah.
partner is definitely had quite a few moments where she's just like, I'm gonna kill this fucker. So, and I think for that one, we just let Cass
Yeah.
and Sarah take over. It just
Yeah. Well, and you work different. I don't know. It's just an abnormal work schedule. Like I said, you do a deploy. I remember having a deploy where I was at the office for 48 hours straight, sleeping in the office, and as well as my colleagues. We are as a team. We embrace the suck together. But unless you are a firefighter or a military, you're never gone for 48 hours straight unexpectedly. That or maybe you're a secret agent or something. But that's a unique aspect to our field that some people have to understand. And maybe when you're young, it sounds fun, but as you get older, as you have family, responsibilities, it's not as fun, but a necessity, which I think then forces you from experience to implement, proper DevOps procedures to help prevent
yeah,
those scenarios. But yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about. I think, from a mental aspect, I think from a physical work, justify your existence aspect. A lot of people talk about empathy about just, saying it's okay, it'll be okay. You had a bad day, it's okay. But really, it's like you still got a program. We still have to get product X done by this time. Whether you do it or I make up your slack and do it myself, it has to be
yep,
deployed or this company doesn't exist and you are out of a job. And I think there's having empathy in that process, but also saying, okay, we have a standard we need to hit. We have expectations when I hire you. And these days, it's, you're above average when you show up and work on time, that I've seen. And so, yeah, I love the idea of talking about, what's required in this field. I work with a lot of high schoolers, a lot of college computer science, future programmers and talk about expectations. And it's interesting to see their worries, what they worry about now than what like you and I may have worried about. Shoot, I just needed to learn how to code. Like it was, we were one step above
yeah.
notepad,
Well, and I mean, hey, we got a built-in demographic
But,
with those groups you're talking about. So, just
yeah, yeah. So I think it'd be great. Again, this is for the community. This is for those that want to listen. What you want to get out of it, put into this. We would love to have, potential future guests starring. We don't have to be people we know. I think questions and comments from those watching our streams or listening to, like, let's talk about it. I don't necessarily want a Twitch feed spinning with comments here on the corner because I don't have that type of focus. But um, it's not the Brian and Aaron rant vent show. This is really to help the community. And if we can facilitate, as we talked about, what those topics are, what we need to talk about, then that just
yeah,
brings more value to the medium. And I'm excited to be here. Like I said, I don't know where we're going fully. I've never done a podcast, but there's a little imposter syndrome there. But we take it a step at a time and you
yep.
eat the elephant a bite at a time. And eventually you get there and there used to be a whole body for this thing here.
That
Now
was
I
a
just have
weird
a YouTube
analogy that took
photo.
a really sharp left turn, man.
There you go. It used to be a really big photo. Take it from a
Now I
wall,
just
but
have
it's
this
a
mental
narrow.
picture of you eating like a painting. Um,
You got to use edible color art, and then it's all right. Yeah, it smells like raspberries. It tastes like
yeah, I
raspberries.
definitely
It's
think there were
raspberries.
edibles involved, but not the kind that you're talking about.
Oh man, it's been a good time. No, Aaron, this is fun, man. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to take part of this with you and you know
Yeah,
see what happens with this. So those that are listening, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you know taking a gander on us, and hope to hear from
yep.
everyone
Same
at some
here.
point.
It's definitely going to be a learning process for both of us. And it's only going to get better as we go, as long as we don't get shut down immediately. So yeah, I appreciate jumping on with me, Foster, and well, Brian. I
You
still
bet,
have a
man.
bad habit of calling you Foster. I don't know why.
I've been called a lot worse,
I've
so
probably
I'll
called you
take
worse.
either.
So We'll run with that.
Probably.